mag-start na tayo mag-review. Ano ba topic? Alam ko endocrine yun eh.
Di ba yun yung yung thyroid, parathyroid, pancreas? Di ba ayun yun?
Hindi ko alam eh, kaya nga mag-review na tayo.
Okay.
Ano ba yung unang topic niya? Japheth, ano ba?
Hindi.
Uy, pwede your viewer.
Wait lang, ito na, send ko sa inyo. O, ito na lang, share na muna tayo.
Patingin din ako. Anong page yan?
Ito. Tapos explain mo na rin.
Ba, wait lang. Endocrine system. Yung nag-aano ng mga glands. Okay.
Oo, tapos yung mga nagsisikip ng mga
Oo.
Okay. Hindi ko meron.
A few moments later. Few inches later.
Hello everyone, welcome to our video presentation. We are going to discuss about the endocrine system. So the endocrine system, it is all about the hormones. What are hormones? From where they are secreted and the target regions in the human body and its functions. So what is the endocrine system? So the endocrine system is made up of numerous gland-like structures. These glands, which can be found all over your body, produce and secrete hormones. In order to affect an organ in another region of the body, hormones are released into the bloodstream. The number of hormones in your blood is regularly monitored by your endocrine system. So let me give you a scenario. Let's say that there is an organ present in our brain from where this hormone is secreted, which are chemical messenger that provides information to the target cell which is present, let us say, in our liver. This hormone will migrate through the blood vessels in the middle. So hormone is like a long-distance call thing in the human body. And the target cells that receives the hormone, they have those hormonal receptors present in their surface of the cells, which can attach with the target hormone, and that triggers some signaling response inside those tissues. So what are hormones? Hormones are substances that communicate with your organs, skin, muscles, and other tissues through your blood to coordinate various bodily functions. These signals tells your body what to do and when to do it. All body components are affected by hormones. However, only the target cells with the right receptors can react. As I said a while ago, there's a hormonal receptors on the surface of those cells, and if they have the right receptors, they will respond. Now, hormones can be of three different types chemically. It can be of peptide, which is a protein type. It can be of steroid, which is hydrophobic in most of the part and is derived from lipids. And it can also be amine type of hormones, which is derived from the amino acid. So, the function of these hormones is that it contributes to the smooth, regulated integration of growth and development. It also helps regulate metabolism and energy balance, which regulates certain activities in the immune system. Now, let us talk about the most important organs in our body which are linked to produce hormones known as endocrine glands. This diagram shows you all the different types of endocrine glands that are present in our body. So as you see in the diagram, near the brain, there are two different glands, the pituitary, which is known as the master gland, which is one of the most important glands, and there is also pineal gland. These two plays a vital role in controlling the rest of the endocrine gland that are present in our body. And among those glands, we have the thyroid, the parathyroid, pancreas, adrenals, ovaries, and testes. Now, let's look at first the pituitary gland.
The pituitary gland. Sometimes called the hypophysis, is a small pea-sized gland located at the base of your brain, below your hypothalamus. It sits in its own little chamber under your brain, known as the Sicat Thrisha. It is a part of your endocrine system and is in charge of making several essential hormones. Your pituitary gland also tells other endocrine system glands to release hormones. Weighs 500 mg, located at the base of brain. It is 1 cm in diameter. The pituitary gland lies in the Sicat Thrisha of the sphenoid bone below the hypothalamus. Pituitary gland is the small structure in the head and main endocrine gland. The normal adult pituitary gland is a reddish-gray bean-shaped gland. It is also called the master gland because it produces the hormones that control other glands and many body functions including growth. Division of pituitary gland. It consists of two main parts that originate from different types of cells. The anterior pituitary gland. It is an end-up growth of granular epithelium from the pharynx. The anterior pituitary gland regulates the functions of several other glands through the secretion of tropic hormones. ACTH, which release of cortisol in adrenal glands. TSH, release of T3 and T4 in thyroid gland. FSH stimulates growth of ovarian follicles and spermatogenesis in males, and LH regulates growth of gonads and reproductive activities. It also synthesizes and secretes GH, which stimulates growth of bone or tissue, and PRL promotes mammary gland and growth of milk secretion. Importance of anterior pituitary control chemical and water balance in the body control, growth and metabolism, influences sexual behavior, and stimulates growth and maturation of the gonads. Posterior pituitary gland. It is formed from the nervous tissue and nerve cells, surrounding by supporting and glial cells. It stores hormones secreted by the hypothalamus. The posterior pituitary gland secretes oxytocin and ADH, which are synthesized in the hypothalamus. These hormones affect cells in the kidneys, breast, and uterus. The importance of posterior pituitary, as it takes messages from the brain via a gland called the hypothalamus. It uses these messages to produce hormone that affects many parts of the body, including stimulating all other hormone producing gland to produce their own. The pituitary gland is small and oval shaped. It's located behind your nose, near the underside of the brain. It is attached to the hypothalamus by a stalk-like structure. Hangs by stalk from the inferior surface of the hypothalamus of the brain, where it is snugly surrounded by the Turk saddle of the sphenoid bone. It regulates growth, metabolism, and reproduction through the hormones that it produces. The production of this hormone is either stimulated or inhibited by chemical messages sent from the hypothalamus to the pituitary. The main function of your pituitary gland is to produce and release several hormones that help carry out important bodily functions, including growth, metabolism, how your body transforms and manages the energy from the food you eat, and reproduction, the response to stress or trauma, lactation, water and sodium balance, labor, and the childbirth.
Now, second type of gland that we are going to talk about is the pineal gland. The pineal gland has a tiny 6 mm long glandular body. Its name is derived from the fact that it resembles a pine cone, and it has a sympathetic innervation. So there are two types of cells present within the gland, the pinealocytes and the glial cells. The pinealocyte is situated between the two hemispheres of the brain and behind the third ventricle. The release of the hormone melatonin is the pinealocyte's main job function, and the glial cells are the supporting cells. So for its location, the dorsal surface of the brain is where the pineal gland is situated. Between the two cerebral hemispheres, there is a midline structure. It is attached to the posterior wall of the third ventricle by a stalk. The pair of structures located close to the gland in the midbrain, called the superior colliculi, are essential to vision. As for its function, pineal gland produces a hormone known as melatonin, which is an amine type of hormone. Its function is not very much understood, but it's thought to be like this. Melatonin used to function like a dark and light cycle in our body, and it mostly helped us to fall asleep. So it kind of worked like a body clock. So this hormone targets various tissues in the body. It is also involved in daily rhythms and also possible in maturation of sex organs. Also, pineal gland produces serotonin, which is a protein type of hormone. It functions as a neurotransmitter that influences sexual desire, appetite, sleep, and emotional behavior.
Let us now discuss the thyroid gland. The thyroid gland is a brown reddish, butterfly-shaped endocrine gland situated in the lower part of the neck. It originates from the thyroid diverticulum and develops during the third to fourth gestational week, and it develops from endoderm that lines the pharyngeal arches. It plays an essential role in regulating the basal metabolic rate and stimulates somatic and psychic growth, besides having a vital role in calcium metabolism. It is a gland consisting of two lobes, the right and the left lobes, joined together by a central mass called isthmus, and sometimes a third lobe called the pyramidal lobe projects from the isthmus. Each lobe of thyroid gland is 5 centimeters long, 3 centimeters wide, and 3 centimeters thick and weighs approximately 10 to 20 grams. Here is an illustration of the thyroid gland, and as we can see, the lobes are conical in shape and have an apex which is directed upwards and laterally and extends to the oblique line of the thyroid cartilage. It lies opposite to C5 vertebra. We also have the base. It extends up to the fifth or sixth tracheal cartilage ring and lies opposite to T1 vertebra. Also the three surfaces, which is the lateral, medial, and the posterolateral, and the two borders, which is the anterior and posterior. On the isthmus part, it has two surfaces, which is the anterior and posterior, and two borders, the superior and inferior. Let us now move on to its structure. The thyroid gland is divided into lobules by the septae dipping from the capsule. The thyroid lobules consist of many typical units called thyroid follicles, which is the structural and functional units of the thyroid gland. The thyroid tissue is made up of two types of cells, the follicular cells and the parafollicular cells. The follicular cells are spherical, and the wall is made up of a large number of cuboidal cells. These follicular cells are the derivatives of the endoderm and secrete thyroid hormone. The circulating form of this hormone is thyroxine, which is tetrahydrothioneine or T4, along with a small quantity of triiodothyronine or T3. Even though most of T4 later converts to the more active form T3, both affect the target cells with varying degrees of stimulation. And in between these thyroid follicles, or within the wall of the thyroid follicles, we find the parafollicular cells, also known as the C cells, clear or light cells. These are derived from neural crest cells and secrete polypeptide hormone known as calcitonin. The thyroid gland secretes three hormones, the T3, the T4, and the calcitonin. The T3 forms about 9% to 10% of the total secretion, whereas the T4 forms about 90%. The T3 aids in the maintenance of muscle control, brain function and development, as well as heart and digestive functions. It also helps to regulate the body's metabolic rate and maintain bone health. The T4 is responsible for metabolism, mood, and body temperature. They are both iodine-containing derivatives of amino acid tyrosine. And the calcitonin decreases blood calcium levels by causing calcium to be deposited in the bones. The degradation of thyroid hormones occurs in muscles, liver, and kidney.
Next is the parathyroid gland. The parathyroid gland is a small oval-shaped gland. It is located at the posterior surface of the thyroid gland. Basing on the figure, these are the ones that are highlighted in the shade of green. It is composed of closely packed epithelial cells that are separated by thin fibrous bands and some fat cells. The two main epithelial cells of the parathyroid gland are the chief cells that are more abundant and the occipital cells that are less abundant. The superior parathyroid gland is derived from the fourth pharyngeal pouch and is in the middle of the posterior border of each thyroid lobe. It is 1 centimeter superior to the junction of the recurrent laryngeal nerve or the RLN and the inferior thyroid artery. The inferior parathyroid gland is derived from the third pharyngeal pouch. These are inconsistent in location but are usually found near the inferior poles of the thyroid gland. It is within 1 to 2 centimeters of the insertion of the inferior thyroid artery into the inferior pole of the thyroid. The inferior parathyroid gland classically lies superficial to the plane of the RLN. The chief cells of the parathyroid gland manages the secretion of the parathormone or parathyroid hormone or the PTH, whereas the occipital cells does not have any definite purpose, but they are larger in size and increases in number with age. The parathyroid gland releases the PTH as it controls the level of calcium and phosphate concentration in the blood. The function of PTH in the bones stimulate the release of calcium by the bones into the bloodstream. In the kidneys, it minimizes the calcium loss in the urine and stimulates the active vitamin D. Lastly, in the intestine, it absorbs calcium from food.
Next is the pancreas. Characteristic of the pancreas is elongated and tapered organ that measures for about 6 inches long and less than 2 inches wide. It is spongy and is shaped like a flat pear or a fish extended horizontally. Structure of the pancreas has 4 parts. Head of the pancreas is its medial and large portion. It is directly opposed to the descending and the horizontal portion of the small intestine that wraps around the pancreatic head. Its neck is roughly 2 cm structure that binds the head to the body. The body consists of 2 surfaces, anterior and posterior, and 2 borders, superior and inferior, located anteriorly to the second lumbar vertebra. Tail of the pancreas runs along the splenic vessels in the splenorenal ligament and is located close to the splene's hilum. The anterior of the pancreas is located behind the stomach, lesser sac, transverse mesocolon, superior mesenteric artery. Posterior to the inferior vena cava, right renal artery, right and left renal veins, superior mesenteric vessels, left kidney, and left suprarenal gland. It is superior to the splenic artery and lateral to the spleen. Lastly, it is medial to the duodenum. Pancreas is an accessory organ that is made up of 2 types of gland. Exocrine gland of the digestive system. Endocrine gland that produces hormone. Exocrine function as synthesizing and releasing of digestive enzymes into the small intestine's duodenum, while endocrine function involves the release of the important hormones insulin and glucagon into the bloodstream, which regulates glucose, lipids, and protein metabolism.
Let us move forward to the adrenal glands. The adrenal glands or the suprarenal glands are paired triangular-shaped organs that measure approximately 5 centimeters by 2 centimeters, located on the superior aspect of each kidney and weighs 4 to 5 grams each. It is within the renal fascia and perirenal fat and is separated from the kidneys by a fibrous tissue. The adrenal gland is composed of two distinct tissues, the outer cortex and the inner medulla. The adrenal cortex is the outer portion of the gland and is of mesodermal origin and is derived from the adrenogenital ridge. It makes up 80 to 90% of the gland by volume, and it tends to be fattier and thus has a more yellow hue. The adrenal cortex is organized into three layers, each with a different function: the zona glomerulosa, the zona fasciculata, and the zona reticularis. The zona glomerulosa is the most superficial layer and is responsible for the synthesis of mineralocorticoids, of which the most important is aldosterone, and its cells are arranged in circular clusters. The middle zone is the zona fasciculata, containing radial columns of lipid-laden or fat-filled cells that primarily produces glucocorticoids, of which the predominant hormone is cortisol. The secretion of cortisol is under the adrenocorticotropic hormone regulation, which is released from the pituitary gland. And the cells in this zone are arranged in columns. And the innermost layer, the zona reticularis, produces androgens and plays a role in the development of secondary sexual characteristics. The primary androgen produced in the zona reticularis is dihydroepiandrosterone, which is the most abundant hormone in the body. The cells in zona reticularis are arranged in reticular position. Next to adrenal cortex is the adrenal medulla, which is the central portion of the gland that develops from neural crest cells and makes up 10% to 20% of the gland by volume, and it contains homogeneous sheets of cells organized into nests. It secretes catecholamines, the epinephrine and norepinephrine, which is responsible for the fight or flight response. The left and right suprarenal glands differ slightly in their shape and location on top of their respective kidneys. The right suprarenal gland is pyramidal in form and rests on the diaphragm, and the medial anterior portion is crossed by the inferior vena cava, while on the left side, the suprarenal gland is crescentic in shape and rests on the left crus of the diaphragm, and the upper anterior surface is covered by the peritoneum. The adrenal gland secretes mineralocorticoids, which include corticosterone, 11-deoxycorticosterone, and more importantly, aldosterone, which acts on the kidney to increase sodium reabsorption and potassium excretion. The glucocorticoids, that is concerned with normal organic metabolism and resistance to stress. The cortisol, the major glucocorticoid, is essential for maintaining blood pressure because it increases the sensitivity of vascular smooth muscle to vasoconstrictors like catecholamines and suppresses the release of vasodilators like nitrous oxide. The adrenal androgen that plays a role in reproductive health and body development, and the catecholamines that is involved in executing the fight-or-flight response of the sympathetic nervous system.
Hi, I'm Mckenzie Guen Alamo, and on the 7th slide, I'm going to discuss ovaries. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'm going to discuss the characteristics of an ovaries. Ovary is a solid oval structure about the size and shape of an almond, about 3.5 cm in length, 2.5 cm in wide, and 1.5 cm in thick. The ovaries are located in a shallow depression called ovarian fossae, one on each side of the uterus and in the lateral walls of the pelvic cavity. Each of the ovaries also weighs about 8 to 4 gm. It is attached to the uterus by ovarian ligament. Next slide, please. In this slide, I'm going to discuss the structure of an ovaries. The ovaries have three structures: the cortex, medulla, and hilum. The cortex is in the outer part of the ovaries, while the medulla is in the inner, and the hilum is the most proximal in the perioovarian tissue. Next slide, please. So in this slide, I'm going to discuss the function of ovaries. So they create and store your eggs, also known as ovum, as well as the hormones that regulate both pregnancy and your menstrual cycle. During the ovulation, your ovaries will produce eggs. Estrogen and progesterones are secreted by your ovaries.
Lastly is the testes, which is another type of gland. So for its characteristics, the spermatic cord suspends it in the scrotum, which causes its upper pole to be inclined medially forward. Also, one testicle, usually the left, often hangs lower than the other. It has an oval shape and its length is about 3.75 cm and 1.8 cm thick on each side. So for its structure, the glandular part of the testis contains 200 to 300 lobules. So each lobe contains 2 to 3 seminiferous tubules. Spermatogenesis, or the process of producing sperm, is carried out by the cells and tissues found in these seminiferous tubules. Then, these tubules anastomose at apices to form network called retitestis. Sperm cells move toward the epididymis through the retitestis after being produced in the seminiferous tubules. The fluid released by Sertoli cells contains sperm cells that have been mixed around by the retitestis. So as sperm cells move from the seminiferous tubules to the epididymis, the body reabsorbs this fluid. And then, each of the retitestis give rise to 12 to 30 efferent ductules, which form the head of the epididymis. And it is continuous with ductus deferens. So most of the fluid that aids in the movement of sperm cells is also absorbed by the efferent ducts. As a result, there are more sperm in the ejaculate fluid. So for the coverings of the testes, it is composed of 3 layers that is responsible for protecting the testes: the tunica vaginalis, tunica albuginea, and tunica vasculosa. So in tunica vaginalis, visceral and parietal layers are present. The testis, the head of the epididymis, and the lower portion of the ductus deferens are all covered by the visceral layer. The visceral layer of the tunica vaginalis is covered by the bigger and superiorly positioned parietal layer, which also cover the duct of the epididymis and the distal portion of the spermatic cord. The tunica albuginea, or the superficial layer of the testis, is a capsule consisting of strong fibrous connective tissue. The mediastinum testis, a connective tissue compartment through which all vessels and ducts of the testis travels on their way in or out, is formed by the tunica albuginea, which thickens along the posterior surface of the testis and projects into it. Lastly is the tunica vasculosa. It makes an internal investment to all the compartments that make up the gland by covering the inner surface of the tunica albuginea and the various septa inside the gland. So the secreted hormones here is also known as sex hormone of male, and this hormone are also a steroid type of hormone. In this case, they produce the hormone testosterone. This testosterone helps male gametes, or the growth and maturation of sperm cells, develop. It also provides the secondary sexual characteristics such as deepens the voice, make facial hair grow, develops heavy muscles and bones. Its targeted organs are the reproductive organs, which has an effect on the reproductive development. So in that sense is the overview of the endocrine system. And that would be all. Thank you.